Eyes in the sky, watching us from space. Hundreds of satellites showing us the world like we've never seen it before. Capturing images which are breathtaking but bizarre. Objects and phenomena which defy explanation.
What is that?
An island the size of Manhattan that's vanished from the ocean.
The island is completely missing, gone, not hidden under the water, but gone.
Remnants of an Amazonian city that could be El Dorado.
Our understanding of civilizations in the Amazon jungle will never be the same again.
Bizarre patterns that seem to unleash a torrent of devastating weather.
There's no possible way these could be natural.
And has a U.S. spy satellite made a biblical discovery?
There's only one boat that could possibly have come to rest on Mount Ararat, and that's Noah's Ark.
Baffling phenomena seen from space. What on earth are they? December 12th, 2008. The GOI-1 satellite orbits 423 miles above Namibia in West Africa when it captures this image. Rings like pockmarks on the desert floor. Analysts zoom out to get a wider view. Then the extraordinary number of rings is revealed. Countless thousands of mysterious circles stretching 1,200 miles from Angola down the Skeleton Coast through Namibia into South Africa. Analysis indicates that the rings vary in size from 6 to 65 feet across. If this is a natural phenomenon, it's like no other on Earth.
They're just freaks of nature.
When you see them from space, they're just so mysterious, all these different circles in such a regular pattern, and it just makes you wonder, what made these circles?
Scientists pore over the satellite images, but no one is able to explain the rings. They need to be examined at ground level. Rafael Scriba is a Namibian journalist who's been sent to investigate. He's heading from the capital southwest into the vast Namib wilderness. This desert has been here for as long as 80 million years. It's the oldest on Earth. Scriba finally reaches the rings. They stretch as far as the eye can see. He notices one thing they all have in common.
It is a perfect circle. As you see, there's no grass inside, but all the big grass is outside the circle.
Grass cannot survive inside the circles, but that's not all. The rings seem devoid of all life. To sustain life, there needs to be some water in the ground. Scriba tests it with a moisture meter.
And my testing says absolutely dry. There is no moisture in the ground. Nothing grows inside here.
Desert grass grows in the Namib because even in an arid place like this, there is rainfall. But Scriba's tests show no moisture, an unexplained dead zone framed by a circle of grass. And he's found something else. The local nomadic tribes people say their ancestors knew about the rings.
Locals call them rings of death, and you can totally understand why.
Deadly circles within which nothing can survive. But how can this be?
One of the ideas is that these were actually formed by termites. The termites would live in the ground, killing the plants that lived over them.
There are 32 types of termite in southern Africa. Billions of the creatures are busy building countless huge nests beneath the surface of the Namib. Dr. Walter Schinkel, a termite specialist, is drafted in to investigate.
Well, the test we did was to dig trenches to look for termite sign, to look for nests of termites, to map the location of termite nests in relation to the circles, and there was no association. There simply wasn't any.
Searching for another explanation, Dr. Schinkel analyzes satellite images of the rings taken at different times.
What I did was to compare images from 2004 and 2008 and look for circles that had either disappeared or appeared in that period of time. So in this way, I was able to establish that the circles have a life cycle, that they're born and they mature to some stable size and then they disappear again after some period of time.
Dr. Schinkel's findings are shocking. These rings are acting like they're alive, and they're growing. Science, it seems, has no answers. The locals believe the death rings have supernatural origins. The native Himba people believe the circles are formed by the poisonous breath of a dragon that lives beneath the ground. Might there be an element of truth in the legend? Could there be subterranean toxic gases poisoning the desert soil from below?
There are places on Earth where natural gases escape, and they come out naturally. They can kill trees, they can kill animals, and it can kill people.
It's happened before. In 1897, the corpses of several bears were discovered in a canyon in Yellowstone Park. The deaths were attributed to asphyxiation by carbon dioxide. The canyon is called Death Gulch. Can the African death rings be blamed on deadly volcanic gases bubbling up from beneath the soil? Scriba is here to find out.
What I have here, it's a gas monitor that tests poison gas.
Scriba's equipment can detect and identify a wide range of gases, both toxic and combustible.
No, there is nothing. No poisonous gas. It's still a mystery.
If it's not gas and it's not termites, could there be some other organic explanation for the death rings?
Non-random patterns like this, where there's equal spacing of these features, very commonly these are biological organisms.
From the air, it looks almost like a viral skin infection. From space, too, it looks like a disease. Could this be a clue?
Across the entire planet, the total mass of viruses exceeds the mass of all life by a huge factor. And this population of viruses is constantly changing. So we are in an environment of viruses that are uncharted in terms of what they're going to do or what they are.
Is this some viral infection of the Earth? If this is a deadly disease, it's one for which we have no cure.
Scientists have flocked to this area and taken all sorts of different measurements about the soil, about the insects, about the plants, and yet we still don't know what causes these circles.
A satellite image taken over the South Pacific shows what appears to be an island. In later photos of the same spot, the island has vanished.
An island that was there and is now not there is a huge mystery.
How do you lose an entire island?
In November 2012, 500 miles east of Australia, an image is released of a Pacific island captured by an Earth observation satellite. But the island has been blacked out.
This island shows up on open source satellite footage, but a lot of it's been pixelated, which is what you do when you're trying to hide something like a military base or whatever.
If you see pixelation, you think, wait a minute, what is this, censorship? There's something there that someone doesn't want us to see.
It's not like the landmass is a secret. Sandy Island has been charted numerous times and featured on nautical maps going back 250 years. In 2012, intrigued by the pixelated landmass in the satellite image, Professor Stephen Micklethwaite set sail to find out what's being hidden.
We saw this island in the Google Earth data and it looked really weird, and we thought, well, we'll just check it out. It was pretty big. It was 26 kilometers long. You look at the satellite photos of the surface of this island, it was black.
His research vessel eventually reaches the island.
We got there in the middle of the night. It was a starry night. We could see a reasonable amount, and there was just no island.
Stephen and his team check the navigation systems. They are fully operational, and the coordinates are accurate.
The island is completely missing, gone, not hidden under the water, but gone.
Ships and planes have vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. Submarines have sunk without a trace. But an entire island?
I remember going up to the bridge where the captain was and saying, "Congratulations, John, you've just undiscovered an island."
The disappearance presents investigators with a bizarre challenge: how to find a scientific explanation for an island that's gone missing.
An island that was there and is now not there is a huge mystery.
There are a number of competing theories. One, it has been submerged beneath the waves.
The sea level goes up a little bit, the island is going to disappear. When the sea level goes back down, the island will reappear.
But satellite data shows global sea levels climbing at just 1/10 of an inch per year. If it is submerged, the island must have been incredibly flat, and it should be sitting just below the surface. To get an accurate sonar reading of what's below, Professor Micklethwaite takes the boat as near as he dares to the island, taking care not to run aground. The sonar maps the seabed and reveals something even more perplexing. There is nothing just beneath the surface, just a straight drop to the ocean floor, some 4,500 feet below. Sandy Island hasn't sunk, it's vanished. How could an island the size of Manhattan disappear? Another theory is that the original 18th century maps charting Sandy Island were flawed. Early explorers had no GPS or other sophisticated mapping tools. Mistakes were made.
For example, the famous Pitcairn Island, where the mutiny on the Bounty boys settled, was safe territory for them because they discovered that Pitcairn had been misplaced on the maps by several hundred miles. The most likely explanation for Sandy Island is that it was one of those cases.
But Sandy Island was originally charted by Captain James Cook, arguably the most celebrated cartographer in nautical history.
Captain Cook saw an island there, and he's a pretty reliable source.
In the late 18th century, Cook mapped lands from New Zealand to Hawaii, surveyed islands right across Europe. He was a pioneer of modern, accurate cartography. What's more, this island has been repeatedly observed and charted. French navigators recorded it 2 decades after Cook. English sailors on the whaling ship Velocity observed it 80 years after that. An alternate theory suggests that Sandy Island wasn't an island at all, but rather floating pumice, a buoyant rock formed by volcanic activity.
The problem with this idea is that pumice islands are relatively fluid structures. They move around a lot. They don't have beaches or waves breaking on them.
Pumice rafts don't stay in one place, they drift. When Krakatoa erupted in 1883, pumice rafts carrying burnt human skeletons drifted 4,000 miles across the Indian Ocean. And even if the most famous cartographer of his day mistook drifting pumice for an island, then what did sailors on the Velocity see at the exact same spot 100 years later? According to multiple eyewitnesses, Sandy Island was real. So where's it gone?
An island going away is not something you see happen in a quick way. You have to wonder, was it moved by man?
With no obvious logical explanation for the disappearance, more outlandish theories are put forward.
The whole area, of course, is one that was used extensively by the US military. The military would love this kind of technology to make something disappear.
In 1943, the US military is alleged to have conducted an exercise codenamed the Philadelphia Experiment.
The Philadelphia Experiment was an attempt to make a ship disappear, and it's claimed that Albert Einstein was involved. According to some people, a US Navy ship, the USS Eldridge, completely vanished. Now, some people say that it just became invisible. Other rumors were that it had somehow gone back in time.
But the US Navy denied that any such experiment ever took place, and scientists dismissed the idea as fantastical. Yet the problem remains that Sandy Island is missing. Maps that once included the island have erased it. On the latest satellite images, there is nothing but sea. No one knows what happened to Sandy Island, or if they do, it's a well-guarded secret. A set of weird circular shapes appear on meteorology maps of Australia.
They can't possibly be real.
Each one seems to preempt freak extreme weather.
You see these weird formations, and then all of a sudden there's torrential rain.
January 22nd, 2010. Meteorologists in Australia spot a bizarre disk of glowing rings on their satellite radar images. It's like nothing they've ever seen. A strange, giant white circle hanging over the city of Melbourne.
Within this sort of outer band, there was just lots of little dots, speckled areas.
When I first saw pictures of these spiral images, I thought to myself, there's no possible way these could be natural.
The disk spans an area of tens of thousands of square miles across southeast Australia, reaching out to the island of Tasmania off the south coast. Prior to the appearance of the white rings, there have been no storms or violent weather. Quite the opposite. The country is experiencing one of its longest droughts on record. The spiral mystifies Australia's meteorologists.
This sort of situation is quite abnormal. Something quite wrong is going on.
The weather scientists try to find a logical explanation.
It was very difficult at that time to necessarily know exactly what was going on. We just thought maybe there's a radar issue.
Ground-based radar technology combines with satellite imagery to create a real-time map of changing weather across Australia. But radar is an old and reliable technology. It doesn't normally pick up stuff that isn't there. Then, more circular shapes begin to appear in other parts of Australia. One on the northwest coast spans around 400 miles. Around a red and white eye is a black circle with black lines radiating out. Then another on the south coast, similar to the first, a disk of dotted glowing rings. More images appear, and the meteorologists begin to think their systems are either failing or being interfered with. Is this some computer virus threatening to bring down Australia's entire weather surveillance system?
Considering the processing that it takes to take an image from space, process it through a computer, stream it along bandwidth to an Earth center, reprocess it into an image, it looks like a computer glitch.
But what happens next suggests this is no computer virus. The appearance of each strange symbol seems to herald extraordinary and extreme weather. Melbourne is engulfed in one of the worst storms in the city's history. Flash floods, 4-inch hailstones, a month's rain in just 48 hours, and a mini tornado.
The timing of these events is really unusual. Before these images were taken, there had been a very long-lasting drought over Australia. After these images happen, we suddenly get massive, big thunderstorms.
From one weather extreme to another, a record-breaking drought suddenly turns into the wettest spring on record. It may just be a coincidence, but whenever the circles appear, reports follow from each location of freak weather events. Just what are these circles and spirals? Speculation spreads. Is this some kind of experimental weather weapon?
We've had historical instances where the military has had projects to try to, for example, control hurricanes.
To be able to control the weather at the flick of a switch, that's scary stuff.
If you can intensify a storm and even guide it to one place or another, then you have the foundation for what has been known for a long time as weather war. You cause an earthquake or a typhoon or a hurricane, lots of destruction in your enemy's country.
It sounds like something out of science fiction, but weather manipulation weapons do exist and have been used before.
The United States conducted Operation Popeye during the Vietnam War from 1967 to 72, where they would seed the clouds to make it rain.
U.S. military aircraft pumped huge quantities of cloud-seeding chemicals into the air above enemy territory in Vietnam. The aim was to cause devastation. The resulting downpour is said to have turned dirt tracks into rivers of mud, created landslides, made it impossible to move vehicles and troops. The monsoon season was extended by weeks, destroying harvests. The U.S. military had found themselves a new mega-weapon, the weather. But research into more sophisticated weather weapons, if it's taking place, is top secret.
That was 40 years ago, so you can kind of imagine how much more advanced they must be today.
Weather weapon or not, one thing is for sure. Something happened here. Something meteorologists are still unable to explain. As satellites track over the Amazon jungle, they spot a strange shape in a clearing.
First time I saw the images, I thought, wow.
An area once inhabited by cannibals. Could a satellite have captured El Dorado, the fabled city of gold?
There's a whole lot of gold waiting to be discovered.
November 20th, 2001. The GOI-1 Earth observation satellite is orbiting high above the Amazon rainforest of Brazil. Below, there is logging taking place, and as it does, it uncovers land which has remained concealed for centuries. As the satellite passes over, it captures lines carved into the landscape of what appears to be trenches, ditches, and mounds. These are not the scars of logging machines, nor are they natural. They form some kind of pattern, man-made, in one of the most remote areas on Earth.
First time I saw the images, I thought, wow.
They look literally almost like a geometric equation etched into the Earth.
There's no way these things are natural.
The satellite image shows a rectangular plateau surrounded by a supporting mound with other longer lines in the ground nearby extending into the jungle. Analysis shows that the main feature is large, around 850 feet long and 650 feet wide. If these are man-made, then there was once something much bigger than a jungle village here.
These are not just ordinary structures. When you look at the images, they appear to be walls. They appear to be foundational structures.
The main pattern or structure resembles the earthwork foundations of ancient and medieval structures, the palaces and temples of the ancient Near East, and the forts and castles of feudal Europe. But temples and castles are the work of developed civilizations, and they're usually found in easily habitable places, not the middle of the Amazon.
It was such a brutal environment in the jungle that it could only support very small, isolated tribal communities, and that the environment was simply not able to sustain large populations.
So what strange kingdom could have existed in this inhospitable, dense jungle? There may be a clue, written in the notes of an explorer who in 1925 manages to reach this far into the Amazonian jungle. English soldier Lieutenant Colonel Percival Harrison Fawcett.
Percy Harrison Fawcett was really the last of the great Victorian and Edwardian explorers. These people who would venture off into the blank spaces of the map with little more than a machete.
Fawcett goes to South America, sent by the Royal Geographical Society to map the jungle. But his study of historical records and ancient legends convinces him that hidden in the jungle are the remains of an ancient city that some believe is the legendary El Dorado.
El Dorado was the city of gold, which was thought to be on the shores of a lake. Others thought it was deep in the Amazon.
South America was valued as a colony by the Spanish because of its rich natural deposits of gold. The conquistadors even learned of a jungle kingdom where gold was so abundant they covered their king in gold dust. He became known to the Spanish as El Hombre Dorado, the Golden Man.
Expeditions were sent out on numerous occasions, all ending in disaster.
At this time, the vast Amazon jungle is inhabited by savage tribes who have never seen a European.
Hundreds upon hundreds of people died on these expeditions. They would be killed by the natives.
But Fawcett has a gift for appeasing jungle tribes, for winning their friendship and their help. Following clues given him by tribespeople, he penetrates deep into the jungle. His search for the lost city of Z, as he calls it, finally brings him to an area close to the spot captured in the satellite image. What he finds there, he records in his notes.
He described climbing up an enormous earth mound, and when he looked out, he could see another earth mound across the way. And connecting these earth mounds looked like buried under the jungle. He could swear were these parallel lines. They looked like a causeway.
Could Fawcett's earth mounds be the same ones found by satellite, or are there others nearby? Fawcett believes he is about to discover his lost city, but the trail leads him into an area of jungle infested with cannibals. His guides become frightened and refuse to go on. So Fawcett and two others go alone. The last account of Fawcett alive comes from a tribe he befriended, called the Kalapaulo.
They had this epic story that was passed down from generation to generation. And in that account, it describes how Fawcett and two other people were determined to keep heading towards what the Kalapaulos called the fierce Indians. And they begged them not to go, and they beseeched them not to go, saying, "You won't survive." But Fawcett was insistent. He set out, and they were never heard from again.
Fawcett believed he had found his lost city. But if he was right, it must have been at the center of a great kingdom. A kingdom which has long since been devoured by jungle. Sure enough, a combination of logging and satellite imagery is uncovering evidence of such a civilization. Many more sites have been identified across an area almost as big as Texas, spreading from Brazil into Bolivia. They bear the telltale signs of a sophisticated ancient settlement. It seems that Fawcett was right. There does appear to have been some kind of great ancient kingdom here.
This must have been one of the wealthiest ancient civilizations on Earth. This discovery now gives, for the first time, some credence to the existence of El Dorado.
Technology which Fawcett could not have imagined may have succeeded where he failed. If satellites have unlocked the mystery of El Dorado, a dazzling bounty awaits anyone who can find it.
There's a whole lot of gold waiting to be discovered.
A Cold War spy satellite captures something that may prove to be one of the greatest archaeological finds in history.
It looks similar to the shape of a boat, and it's very interesting.
The image of the boat goes all the way to the White House for the attention of the president himself.
There's only one boat that could possibly have come to rest on Mount Ararat, and that's Noah's Ark.
December 1973, the height of the Cold War. The Keyhole 9 spy satellite is scanning the mountain range on the Turkish-Soviet border, a place of high strategic significance, looking for Russian troop movements. This photograph is taken by onboard cameras. It films a strange feature in the landscape that stands out from the rock formations around it. It looks like a boat, but the image can't be analyzed right away. It's the early days of satellite photography, and Keyhole 9 still shoots on film. It takes some time to get the image from the satellite back to the US.
The canister of film would drop out of the satellite, re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, deploy a parachute. A specially designed United States Air Force airplane would fly past and grab the parachute out of the air.
At CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, this image is processed and sent for analysis.
It always comes down to somebody hunched over a desk, staring at a photo, trying to figure out what the hell he's looking at.
The analyst who gets this image identifies something at the top of a mountain.
It looks similar to the shape of a boat, and it's very interesting.
An oval shape, but pointed at both ends, rising from the landscape around it. The shape is hollowed out, with what looks like a flat bottom.
It's an image, creates a question, and they want to answer the question.
It looks to the CIA like the remains of a boat, or the impression of a boat. But what is it doing 17,000 feet above sea level?
A boat at nearly 17,000 feet. That would have to be quite some flood. To lift that boat above that altitude, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Where's the evidence for this flood?
But what makes this find special for the CIA is the location. This is Mount Ararat, the mountain described in the Old Testament. According to the Bible, after the great flood sent by God finally begins to subside, Noah sails his ark to the first bit of land to appear above the water. The ark comes to rest on the top of a mountain, and that mountain, says the Bible, is Mount Ararat.
There's only one boat that could possibly have come to rest on Mount Ararat, and that's Noah's Ark.
You can imagine it starts out in the office first. You know, I might have found Noah's Ark. And they're having a cup of coffee or maybe eating lunch. So, what do you got? I got a couple of Soviet tanks. What do you got? I got the Ark.
Further analysis of the satellite image reveals something extraordinary. The dimensions of the boat shape are estimated to be approximately 450 feet long and 100 feet wide. According to the Bible, when God told Noah to build an ark, he specified the dimensions, 300 cubits long and 50 wide. Which, amazingly, roughly corresponds to the shape in the satellite image. But the CIA satellite cameras produce low-resolution images. There's one important question the CIA can't answer.
Is this a geologic material, Or is this possibly a material that was made of a wooden structure?
What could it be? A lot of things. Something that's that long, that has curvature like that and a shape like that, could be many things of ice and rock or some combination of.
Documents that have since been declassified show the CIA investigation is deadly serious.
There were expeditions to the top of Mount Ararat that were done trying to resolve this question.
Unfortunately, the results of any further CIA investigations of the Ark remain classified. So remote and dangerous is the location that other reported attempts to reach it have ended in injury and even death. The question of what caused this strange shape in the landscape may be resolved thanks to new developments in satellite imaging technology.
What I would like to do with Noah's Ark is to actually take another look at it with our super spectral satellite WorldView 3.
The WorldView 3 satellite has multi-spectral imaging cameras that can detect organic matter, and a camera that can record at a resolution of 12 inches.
With the technology that we have on WorldView 3, we can now take another look at it and maybe unlock that mystery in the future.
All known expeditions to find the Ark have failed. Today, the Turkish authorities refuse access as it's a restricted military zone. So for the time being, a satellite image may be the closest we can get. A satellite image taken near Area 51 captures a strange orb.
My first thought was this blob looks very unnatural.
Weirder still, it appears to be flying.
But it doesn't look like any aircraft I've ever seen.
An Earth observational satellite orbits 280 miles above the Nevada desert. In May 2008, it takes this image. The resolution is poor, almost blurry. But the image shows a strange circular blob. Based on the size of each pixel, it looks like the blob is around 35 feet across. It is a silvery, metallic color. But what's strange is it appears to be casting a shadow, as though it's flying. Stranger still is its location. The image is captured at a national security site surrounding Area 51, Nevada. Released on the internet, it starts a frenzy of speculation.
Area 51 is where the government goes when it wants to be alone.
It's isolated, it's well controlled, there's no access to outsiders. Use of deadly force authorized, it says right on the sign at the gate. And they mean it.
It's been claimed that everything from secret weapons testing to dissecting aliens happened here. Area 51 has no official purpose. What is known is this was a weapons and nuclear bomb test site. In the satellite image, you can make out craters caused from explosions. Could they be a clue to the mysterious blob?
When I first looked at it, I said, well, I can see the shadow, I can see the pedestal it's sitting on. It is probably a platform for mounting certain kinds of instruments to monitor for radiation leaks, both during a nuclear test and then afterwards.
But an instrument platform would tend to show much sharper and well-defined edges. And one of the peculiar features of the blob is its blurred edges.
My first thought was this blob looks very unnatural, and I'm just wondering if that is a true photograph of something like that on the ground, or is it just pixelation to blur it, to cover up something that's there?
There weren't any satellites flying around the planet when Area 51 was created back in the early 50s. And so that's changed things. You got to camouflage stuff. There's a whole game being played all the time. And so who knows how many of the stories that get told about it are true?
So if the blob has been camouflaged, what is it? Area 51 is officially linked to Edwards Air Force Base. Its airspace is designated special use. The base is thought to be used for testing experimental aircraft. Could this explain the blob? There are eyewitness accounts of something strikingly similar to the blob, spotted at night just a couple of 100 miles away, in the town of Needles. Ex-police chief Frank Costigan was one of those who saw it.
The shape of it was an oval, like an egg. Whatever it was totally silent. There was no noise. The ground illuminated, almost like a helicopter was flying over shining a spotlight. Never seen anything resembling what I saw that night.
Another witness claims the orb crashed across town.
There was a loud thump. No explosion. No anything, hardly any report at all, just a thud. Like if you were to drop a bowling ball in the sand. Immediately was the thump, thump, thump of the big, heavy chopper. They picked this thing up and flew off, and it was like nothing had happened. It was gone in 5 minutes. Everything was gone.
So who took the mysterious orb? Local talk show host David Hayes thinks he knows.
You're listening to the Tri-State's home of talk, KTOX 1348.
The day after the crash, he had a strange encounter.
There were some vehicles coming off the freeway, and the first vehicle almost looked amphibious. Black, government plates, domes, all kinds of stealth equipment. And I thought, wow, that looks strange. And as I turned around the corner, I passed by them, and the guy kind of stared me down with this real hard look. And I thought, you know, you're the one driving the Star Wars vehicle, not me. I mean, what do you expect us to do, not look?
The vehicles suggest some agency was involved, and the eyewitness to the crash thinks he knows which one.
They picked this thing up, and they flew off with it to the northwest. And that's the way to Nevada and Area 51.
Could the blob captured by satellite in Area 51 be the same as the orb removed by helicopter from Needles? The descriptions are very similar, but are the two objects related?
There's no way to verify. You can't go in there and talk to the public information officer and say, tell me the truth now about what's going on here. That's not how security works, believe me.